From a very early age, Maria learned what it was like to live without anyone. Orphan since the age of 4, she grew up in a simple shelter where everything was told: the time, the toys, the words of affection. There was no lap, there were no bedtime stories, there was no comfort of a family. Still, she waited. She hoped that one day someone would reach out and look her in the eyes with tenderness. Everything she wanted was to be seen, to be treated like people. Even without references of affection, Maria did not harden. On the contrary, he cultivated a sweetness that impressed. She was one of those children who smiled with their eyes, who shared the little they had, who hugged without asking for anything in return. And this calm, delicate way grew with her. He never rebelled. He never lost hope. While the other girls counted the days to leave the shelter, Maria dreamed of a real home where she could be loved. It didn't even have to be much. All it took was a corner of her own and someone who said, "You matter." At 17, Maria already knew how to do a little bit of everything. He learned early to wash, cook, sew, not out of obligation, but out of taste. She helped with the tasks of the shelter with lightness. As someone who understands that serving is also a way of loving, she was dedicated, observant, always willing. When it was time to leave the orphanage, there was no party, just a small suitcase, a change of clean clothes, and a new chance. A job as a maid in the home of a wealthy family in the city. She didn't hesitate. It was his first opportunity to change the course of his own life. He got on the bus with a heavy but firm heart. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I had learned not to expect it to be easy. She took with her her little dreams kept in silence. One day, who knows, he could study, to know the sea, to have a room of your own. Simple things, but which for Maria were worth gold. The house where he went was large, imposing, with high walls and a well-kept garden. A completely different world from the one she knew. Everything was so clean, so tidy, so far. The people there spoke quietly, walked in a hurry, and seemed to carry a coldness that froze to the air. Even so, Maria made an effort from day one. He woke up before everyone else, cleaned every corner with care, cooked carefully, organized the cupboards to perfection. He did everything with affection, not because I had to, but because I believe that when you do good, something good comes back. And deep down, she wanted this, to be recognized, to be welcome, to be part of something greater than loneliness. She was discreet, respectful, and always kept a smile on her face. Even on the most tiring days, her posture was the same, firm, gentle, serene. Those looking from the outside might think that she was just another ordinary maid, but it was enough to observe her for a while to realize that there was something different about that girl, a silent glow, a hope that resisted abandonment. At the back of the small room where she slept, Maria continued to dream, not with luxury or wealth, but with human warmth. One day I wanted to enter her classroom, write my own name in a new notebook, learn beautiful words. He wanted someone who missed him, to notice when she was sad, to ask if she was okay. She wanted so little, but to her, that was all. And that's how she lived, between hard work and light thoughts. He never retaliated rudely, never argued. When she felt the weight of loneliness tighten, she closed her eyes and imagined a different future. He continued to believe that life could indeed be better, and that somewhere, someone might be waiting for her. It was in this time of silent waiting that everything began to change. Her story is just one among many. And if you want to help give voice to others like this, like the video and subscribe to the channel. It's simple, but it makes all the difference. The house where Maria now lived and worked looked like it came out of one of those expensive decoration magazines. Facade of light stones, huge windows with heavy fabric curtains, a garden so perfect that it seemed fake. Right at the entrance, a marble fountain gushed crystal clear water, as if it were necessary to remember every day that there was no shortage of money there. But behind all that calculated beauty, there was an eerie silence, an emptiness that even the shag carpets couldn't hide. Inside the house, the glow was even more intense. Wide staircases, crystal chandeliers, gleaming furniture, rugs that seemed to have never been trodden. Everything impeccable, too impeccable. It was a kind of place where people walked quietly, not out of respect, but out of fear of disturbing the icy weather that dominated the air. Every corner had rules. Every piece of furniture had its place. Every action needed permission. And for Maria, this was more than a challenge. It was a daily exercise in emotional survival. The mistress, Mrs. Helena, was an elegant woman, but with eyes cold as stone. He never raised his voice, but his every word was an order disguised as forced kindness. His presence was enough for everyone to be silent, demanding even in the smallest details. He noticed any deviation, a glass out of place, a poorly stretched sheet, a towel that didn't match the toilet. Nothing went unnoticed. She didn't scream. She humiliated with silence, and that hurt more. For Maria, every day was a test. She woke up before everyone else, worked in silence, avoided being seen. He felt that, in that house so full of luxury, his presence was a tolerated nuisance. No one asked how she was. No one noticed his tired eyes. There, Maria did everything, less to be noticed as someone. The routine was rigid, almost military. Fixed schedules, tasks that repeated themselves like clockwork. Cooking, cleaning, washing, ironing. Everything impeccable. But there was never a thank you, never a gesture of recognition. Only silent demands, judgmental looks, and the constant feeling that, even giving his best, he was still insufficient. The luxury of the house seemed to scream its inferiority at every detail. It was as if the walls were saying, "You don't belong here." And then there was Clara. Clara was the only daughter of Dona Helena. She was 17, the same age as Maria, but she led a completely opposite life. Accustomed to being the center of attention, she was spoiled, arrogant, and unpredictable. She had everything she wanted: expensive clothes, a state-of-the-art cell phone, travel jewelry. But she seemed bored with it all. Nothing satisfied him for long. She lived connected to a distant reality, where the suffering of others was invisible. And even with everything around her, there was something that Clara could not bear: the silent and resilient presence of Mary. The truth is that Maria, unintentionally, bothered her, because, even coming from such a different world, even with the simple clothes and the quiet manner, there was a light in her that Clara did not understand. Maria was kind, even without receiving kindness. She was attentive, even without being noticed. And this irritated Clara deeply. She was used to being served, praised, having her eyes turned to her. But in a short time, he began to realize that his mother's praise for the organization of the house, the taste of food, the impeccable cleanliness, they were accompanied by a discreet look at Mary. And that bothered her more than she could admit. Clara began to test Maria. In the beginning, there were small provocations. I left clothes thrown on the floor on purpose, dirted the bathroom right after cleaning, criticized the food even without having tasted it. But Mary, with patience and firmness, continued to do her work without retaliating. He answered with a discreet smile, lowered his head, and returned to work. This only increased Clara's pent-up fury. It was as if, no matter how hard he tried to knock Maria down, she simply refused to fall. The tension grew in silence. Dona Helena, too busy with her social gatherings and elite commitments, did not notice, or pretended not to notice, the growing unease between her daughter and the maid. For her, it was enough that everything was clean, in order, and that her house continued to be a reason for praise at high society dinners. Maria, in turn, tried not to let it shake her, but it was difficult. Every day it became heavier. The indifference of the mistress, the provocations of Clara, the feeling of not belonging, everything piled up in his chest. At night, lying in her small room at the back of the house, she would look at the ceiling and wonder if that was all that life still had in store for her. There were no more hugs. There were no words of encouragement. There was only work, silence, and a loneliness that seemed to echo through the corridors of that cold mansion. Even so, she insisted, because I still believe that at some point, things could change. Maybe someone somewhere would really see her. Maybe life was just waiting for the right time to show another way. And while she waited, Maria continued to do what she did best. She cared. He took care of the house, the chores, the details. He took care of what was within his reach. Because, even though she was invisible to everyone, she still refused to lose her essence. But Clara was not willing to let it go, and what started with small provocations would soon take an unexpected turn. Even with all the difficulties and the constant feeling of not belonging to that world, Maria did not stop being herself. He was sweet in his eyes, soft in his gestures. He had an education that came from within, from the soul, not from expensive schools or etiquette courses. With each "excuse me," with each sincere good morning, it was as if she broke, even if for a second, the coldness of that house. And this, as discreet as it was, did not go unnoticed. Her simple hair, almost always tied up, hid a natural beauty that didn't need makeup to shine. The clothes were modest, but clean and tidy. His way of walking was light, silent, but there was a firmness in him that surprised. Mary had a presence that did not scream. It just existed, and unintentionally, it bothered him. That delicacy began to attract the attention of people who, until then, barely noticed its existence. And that's when something changed, because the house, which was already loaded with silences and appearances, began to become the stage for disguised looks, small gestures that said a lot, and a growing tension that only those who paid close attention could notice. The first to demonstrate this change was Mr. Augusto, Clara's father, a busy man, always absent, immersed in his business, meetings, and travels. When he was at home, he barely spoke to his daughter or wife. He seemed oblivious to everything. But little by little, he began to notice Maria, in the care with which she set the table, in the kindness when serving coffee, in the way she listened attentively to anyone who spoke to her. It was no big deal. A longer greeting, a slight smile when thanking for service well done. But in that house, even small gestures gained immense weight. Clara, who knew her father's every move, noticed, and that was the fuse of something that had been fed in silence. Envy. Clara couldn't bear to see someone inferior being admired. I couldn't understand how a maid, a simple girl, could receive so much attention without making any effort. She, who had everything, had to fight daily to be seen. He needed to get ready, post photos, get attention on social networks. And even so, it was enough for Maria to smile in a sincere way for everything around her to light up. It was as if Maria's presence was a constant reminder of all that Clara could not be, despite all the luxury that surrounded her. Envy began to grow silently, like weeds. Clara, until then only provocative, began to observe Maria's every gesture with suspicion. He began to test his limits, to look for flaws, to try to find any reason to devalue it. But the harder he tried, the clearer the difference between the two became. Maria did not fight back. He did not defend himself. She just kept being herself. And that was what bothered me the most. Because for Clara, there was nothing more annoying than someone who did not let himself be shaken. Someone who, even at a disadvantage, always seemed to be one step above. Not by status, but by character. The tension inside the house intensified every day. Family lunches were quiet. The hallways looked colder. Clara's looks, previously indifferent, now carried something darker. And Maria, although she pretended not to notice, felt it. She felt in the air, in the sharp words spoken with forced sweetness, in the tasks that came out of nowhere, just to test her. Donna Helena was still oblivious. Maybe by choice, maybe by convenience. As long as everything was in order, he saw no reason to worry. But behind the appearances, something was already out of place. And Maria, in the middle of it all, began to realize that that house hid much more than rules and luxury. He hid his eyes. It hid disputes. He had traps disguised as routine. And then, on some late afternoon, a new situation lit the fuse that Clara had been waiting for. It was a banal detail, something almost imperceptible, but for her it was a last straw. The father praised Maria's cake. He said he reminded him of his childhood, smiled, thanked, and before going up to the office, he still commented, "This girl has hands of gold." Clara froze. That sounded like an affront, as a direct provocation. She, who barely knew how to fry an egg, felt diminished, ridiculed. It was as if, in the face of all the privileges he had, he still lost space to someone who, in the logic of the house, should be content with invisibility. That night, Clara did not sleep. He rolled over in bed, his gaze fixed on the ceiling, ruminating thoughts that grew like a storm about to collapse. Maria, in turn, went to sleep with the same silence as always. She had no idea how much that little compliment had changed the mood around her. He didn't know that, from then on, everything he did, or didn't do, would be cause for judgment, and that Clara, with her restrained fury, was already beginning to draw up plans that went far beyond simple provocations. Because when envy is mixed with wounded pride, the result is never light, and Clara, with her inflated vanity and her fear of losing control, was not willing to back down, especially when she felt that her own home, the only territory where she was still seen as someone important, was being little by little invaded by someone who didn't even have the right to dream big. And it was in this dense, almost unbreathable climate that the following days began to reveal a new face of that house, a face where the appearance could no longer hide what boiled inside, and where every little gesture would become an essential piece in the dangerous game that was about to begin. The days seemed ordinary, but the air was different, dense, stuffy, as if foreshadowing disaster. In the house, everything went on in silence, with the same routine sounds. The cutlery being organized, the noise of the kettle on the stove, Maria's light steps through corridors. From an early age, she took care of the house with the same care as always. Silent, efficient, invisible. The cook had been absent, and Maria, as usual, took on the task without question. He prepared a simple soup with ingredients that were there, potatoes, carrots, some shredded meat. Everything simmered slowly in the large pot, while she stirred attentively, as if her every move was a request for peace. Maria never had a grandmother who taught her recipes. What he knew he had learned by observing, listening, repeating in silence what he saw in the corridors of the orphanage. He grew up among orders, punishments, and loneliness. And in that house where she now lived, she carried the same silence on her face as before, as if she already knew that talking too much was dangerous. Clara suddenly appeared in the kitchen. His eyes were sharp. He didn't say a word. He just observed Maria. The accumulated anger was no longer hidden. Clara saw in the girl something she hated, without being able to explain. Maybe it was her gentle way, the way everyone seemed to like her, even Mr. Augusto, who always praised a job well done. And it corroded her, because deep down, Claire knew that Mary was everything she could not be, light, in spite of everything. Lunch was served in a tense atmosphere. Maria, as usual, brought the soup to the table, carefully serving each dish. The spoon trembled a little in her hand, but she tried to disguise it. Mr. Augusto thanked him with a slight smile, and Maria replied with shy nod, as she always did. Clara watched everything with her narrow eyes, fixed on her. It was then that, without warning, Clara stood up. He took his bowl, still full of hot soup, walked to where Maria was, and in a cruel impulse, turned the contents over the girl's arm and shoulder. Maria's cry was immediate. The pain burned from the inside out, as if the fire had touched his skin. The soup slowly ran down his arm, leaving red marks, blisters forming right there, in front of everyone. The spoon fell with a dry noise. Maria tried to push away the clothes stuck to her skin, desperate, but it was too late. The pain took over. The crying came with force, and the ground seemed to want to swallow her. Everyone looked. No one stood up. No gesture. No outstretched hands. Only the cold voice of Donna Helena, echoing firmly, "Clean up this mess." Now, Maria, trembling, looked at her mistress in shock. I expected, at least, a gesture of care, a minimum of concern. But what he found was a hard, impatient look, as if his pain was just an untimely nuisance. The silence of others was even more cruel. No look of compassion. No words of comfort. Clara, on the other side of the table, just sat down again, his face motionless, unrepentant, almost satisfied, as if he had finally done what he always wanted, as if, at that moment, she had crushed something inside Maria. Crushed, but not destroyed. Maria was still on the ground. The wet tea towel didn't help. The skin throbbed. The heat seemed to rise through the bones. And as she tried to hold back her tears, a terrible feeling set in. No one cared there. She was alone, totally alone. There on the kitchen floor, Maria thought her story would end. But it is not over, because there was something stronger than the pain burning inside, the certainty that she could no longer bear it in silence. And as the pain spread and the damp cloth trembled in his hands, a thought began to grow, like a thread of light in the darkness. And that's when the cleaning lady came in, looked at Maria lying on the floor, approached, and for the first time someone did what no one had done before, stopped. The expression on the employee's face was one of shock, the gaze horrified. She didn't say anything. He just ran out to call for help. The sound of hurried footsteps echoing down the corridor was what interrupted the cruel silence of that room. And in the midst of the pain, something inside Maria began to move. Though weak, though in pieces, she understood something had changed. And for the first time in a long time, the possibility of being seen, of being heard, was beginning to form. The car of the house left in silence, as if carrying a secret that no one wanted to admit. In the back seat, Maria trembled, not only with pain, but with shame, with fear, with everything she could not say. The cleaning worker who accompanied her kept her eyes fixed on the road, as if avoiding looking at Maria was the only way not to collapse. The cloth still covered his burned arm, now soaked and useless. Each jolt made Maria bite her lips so she wouldn't scream. The pain throbbed as if it were alive. But what hurt the most was a feeling of abandonment. It was as if suddenly she had become even more invisible than before. The hospital appeared on the horizon as a strange, cold place, full of lights and smells that she did not recognize. I couldn't remember the last time I'd stepped into a place like that. Maybe I had never stepped on it. Really. The orphanage took care of the children as best it could, but hospitals were not part of the routine. The entrance was quick. The care began as soon as they saw the state of the wound. Doctors and nurses hurried by, talking to each other, with no time for questions. Everything was rushed, mechanical, almost impersonal. Maria curled up on the stretcher, while a nurse opened the makeshift bandages. Her eyes said more than any words. She avoided staring at Maria for a long time, but she couldn't hide her astonishment at the sight of the bruise. It was serious, much more than anyone there would like to admit. Physical pain was one thing, but inside, Maria felt something that didn't bleed, but destroyed. His chest was heavy, his face burned with shame, and deep down, she thought she might deserve it. Perhaps this was exactly what happened to those who had no one. This was how the world treated those who had no last name, no fixed address, no family to call. That was how things worked. She was used to it, but not everything in that hospital would be predictable. That's when he came in, with a clipboard in his hands, his lab coat still clumsy, and that curious look that he didn't judge. Lucas seemed out of place in the midst of the chaos, but at the same time he carried a different presence. He did not enter as someone who was following a protocol. He came in as someone who really wanted to understand what was happening. "Hi, are you Maria?" he asked in a low, almost soft voice. She nodded with shy gesture, unable to hold her gaze. "I'm Lucas, medical student. I'll follow up on your appointment with the doctor. Okay?" She just nodded with a slight shake of her head. He expected quick questions, perhaps suspicious looks, as always. But, unlike everyone who had ever been there, Lucas did not treat Mary as a number. He didn't look at her as if examining a case. He looked as if he saw someone. And this detail, small and silent, was what began to change everything. While the doctor evaluated the burn, Lucas remained nearby, attentive, explaining what was happening. His words were simple, clear, and he spoke directly to her, as if he really wanted her to understand. There was no hurry, no impatience. There was care, and, above all, there was respect. Maria was surprised by that gesture. She was used to being pushed from one side to the other, to answering without being heard, to obeying in silence. But there, on that stretcher, with her skin burning and her eyes still teary, she felt something new, a different heat, not that of pain, but to be seen. When Lucas returned with the bandages, he approached calmly and asked if she wanted him to explain what he was doing. She, not quite understanding why, answered with a weak yes. And for the first time, he paid attention to something someone was saying. This will help relieve the pain. Let's clean it very slowly, okay? Let me know if it hurts too much, he said, his eyes fixed on hers. She didn't say anything, but that care, that tone made the tears come down again. Not because of pain, but because of something more difficult to explain. Because there, in that instant, Maria realized that she had never been treated like this before. I had never been looked at like that, as if it were important. It was strange, almost uncomfortable, as if something was wrong. But it wasn't. That was just new. Lucas noticed her silence and did not insist. He just continued the service with the same delicacy. And when he finished, he took a clean blanket and covered it carefully, as if covering a wound that goes far beyond the skin. I'll be right back, okay? He said with a half smile before leaving. Maria was alone for a few minutes. He looked at the white ceiling, with the sound of the monitors and footsteps in the corridor at the back. Her head was still spinning. Her body ached. But something was different inside her. I didn't know what, but I did. Shortly after, Lucas returned with a glass of water. He handed it to her calmly, sat down next to her, and started talking. He did not ask about what had happened. She didn't want to know who hurt her. He only talked about simple things. From college, of the difficulties, of what it was like to study medicine and not have time for anything. Maria listened in silence, surprised. No one ever wanted to share anything with her. No one ever thought she was someone worth talking to. That night, she slept in the hospital. And for the first time in a long time, he slept with a strange, almost forbidden feeling, security. As if there, far from that house, away from those cold looks, there was a crack through which hope could enter. The next day, Maria woke up with her arm bandaged and her soul a little less tight. Lucas was already there again, holding a clipboard and a pen, as if the shift had never ended. He greeted her with the same discreet smile, and this time she responded with a shy smile, almost without realizing it. It was as if, with each gesture of his, a crack opened in the breastplate she had created, a shield that life forced to build, from the days of orphanage, through rejection, servitude, abandonment. And in that hospital, where everything seemed sad and colorless, Maria discovered something unthinkable. That pain was not the end. That even hurt, even with open wounds, there was room for the unexpected, for someone who listens, for someone who sees. She still didn't know what that meant. I didn't know if it was something real or just another passing illusion. But what she knew with a quiet clarity was that something inside her was beginning to want to resist. And when Lucas asked if she wanted to take a walk through the corridors to stretch her legs, she hesitated. But instead of refusing, he just nodded. It was the first decision he made in a long time of his own volition. And that simple step, however small, however shaky, would be the first of many that she still had no idea where they would go. Maria began to realize that something very different was happening there. In the days following the soup incident, she spent more time in the hospital than she would have liked. The burns, while severe, had not compromised her ability to move, but the emotional impact was more difficult to treat. Yet there was something in that environment, in that strange, cold atmosphere, that was beginning to warm his heart. Luke. At first, she didn't know what to do with that kind of attention. It was uncomfortable, but also comforting, like a new sensation she couldn't identify. When he approached, always with a calm smile, and that curious look, Maria felt, for some reason, lighter. The weight of physical pain did not fade, but Luke's presence seemed to ease the tension in the air. He began to spend more time by her side. At first, it was because of the daily cures. But over time, the conversations became more frequent and the questions more personal. Lucas wanted to know about her life, where it came from, what she liked, what she dreamed of. And Maria, with a little hesitation, began to answer. As the weeks passed, she noticed the way he really listened to her. He was not like other people, who asked without expecting a real answer. Lucas seemed to absorb her words, ask deeper questions, look with attentive eyes, and that made her want to tell more, to talk about the pain, about abandonment, about everything I had experienced in the years of orphanage, but also about what he dreamed of, about how sometimes He imagined a future in which he no longer had to hide, in which he was important. Someone believed her, and it messed with everything. Maria smiled on one of the most difficult days, when he commented in a simple way about something she had never considered. "The pain will pass, Maria, but your strength will stay with you forever." She looked at him with a suspicious look, not knowing if that was true, but something, a thread of hope, began to grow in his chest. He didn't look at her like everyone else. I didn't see her as a victim, but someone who had value. And for the first time in her life, she believed in this vision. The days in the hospital became easier to bear with Lucas around. He did not treat conversations as simple distractions. He tried to understand what moved her, what made her sad or happy. He was present, always willing to be there, offering a smile, a word of encouragement, a joke to lighten the weight of the moment. And, over time, Maria allowed herself to smile too. Sometimes the laughter was small, almost shy, but in each of them there was a little more light. "Did you know that your smile is more beautiful when you try not to smile?" he said once, with that quiet way he had, as if nothing was forced. Maria looked at him, surprised, as if it were the first time anyone had really noticed something so simple, yet so true. She laughed lightly, and he smiled back, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. It was there, in the midst of the bandages, that she began to see herself in a different way. She couldn't say exactly when, but she felt that something inside her was changing. Perhaps it was the fact that, for the first time, she was not alone. Perhaps it was because someone was willing to listen to her words without rushing to judge her or to rush the healing process. She had never felt welcomed in that way, as if her pain was validated and not just ignored. The days in the hospital became a safe space, not because the white walls and the smell of antisepsis made Maria feel comfortable, but because Lucas was there every day, offering what he had best, his time, his attention, his humanity. He wasn't just a medical student. He was someone who was learning the art of caring, not only for bodies, but for souls. And Maria, little by little, began to realize that she was not just a clinical case. She was someone who, perhaps, deserved more than what life had given her so far. Over time, Maria began to trust Lucas more. The conversation between the two became deeper and deeper, as if the closeness and sincerity of the shared moments built an invisible but strong bond. They talked about dreams, about the future, about life after the hospital. Maria, over time, found herself thinking more about possibilities, about something beyond what the pain and frustration of so many years had shown her. She didn't know what the future held, but Lucas' presence, with his calm and empathy, made everything seem more possible. Lucas began to perceive the transformation in Mary. He saw that her eyes, which had previously been erased, now reflected something different. She was no longer just accepting life as it came, but she was beginning to allow herself to dream of something more, something she never imagined was possible. She was believing more in herself, even if silently, in small gestures, like the way she stood up a little more at a time. Sometimes Luke noticed the way she looked at him, not with the need to be fixed, but with a desire to be understood. He could see how hard she struggled to overcome pain, both physical and emotional, and he was there, offering her genuine support, in no hurry to leave, not wanting her to be part of his life, just another story. Their relationship was not something that was shaped overnight, but a construction. Every word, every gesture of affection, every moment of silence made the connection between the two strengthen. Maria didn't know where it was all going, but she felt something very important. She was no longer alone. For the first time, she felt that someone really saw her, understood her, and that changed everything. When the bandages were finally removed and the physical pain subsided, something more important was happening. Maria began to see herself as someone who deserved more. He deserved more than abandonment, more than humiliations, more than oblivion. She deserved a chance. And perhaps this was the greatest transformation of all. Lucas, in turn, knew he was doing something that could not be measured by medical tests or diagnoses. He was helping to heal something invisible, something that went far beyond the skin. He was helping Maria to rediscover her self-esteem, to believe that she had a value that did not depend on anyone but herself. And he knew that by doing so, He was not only healing a wound, but he was touching someone's heart in a way that few had had the chance to do. The days passed, and with each new bandage, each new conversation, the trust between the two solidified. Maria wasn't sure what would happen after she left the hospital, but one thing she knew clearly: she had something on her hands that she had never had before, the chance to believe in herself. And that, in itself, was a giant step towards what was to come next. The time in the hospital passed, and Maria began to recover, but not only physically. Something was happening inside her, something that even she couldn't explain. The marks on her skin began to fade little by little, but the deeper scars, the ones she had carried all her life, were beginning to heal as well. And this all had a lot to do with Lucas, with his words, with the way he made her see that she was not just another orphan, another victim of circumstances that she could not control. She began to realize that as hard as life had been, she had something very precious inside her, the ability to change. Lucas never pressured her, never made promises about what she should do. He was just there, present, offering a true friendship, which turned into something more. He was not the hero who brought her out of the darkness, but someone who believed in her when even she couldn't believe herself. He encouraged her to look to the future, to see beyond the difficulties she faced. Maria, over time, began to understand that if she really wanted to change her story, she would have to take the first step. The decision not to return to her employer's house was one of the most difficult of her life. Maria knew that by making this decision, she would be leaving behind everything she knew, even if it was synonymous with pain and suffering. The boss's house, with a depressive and abusive environment, was the only reality she knew. But little by little, the idea of continuing in that life became unbearable. She didn't want to be submissive anymore. She didn't want to wake up every morning with the feeling that nothing good would come of her day. He didn't want to be invisible anymore, as if his life didn't matter. She wanted something more. She wanted to own her own story. At first, the idea of starting over seemed impossible. How could someone like her, an orphan with no real home, no resources, no experiences, change her life? Mary often found herself alone, not knowing where to start. Fears and doubts haunted her at every step. And, of course, the inner voices that told her that she would never be able to achieve something better. After all, who did she think she was? A poor girl with no family, no one to support her. However, something inside her insisted, like a small but constant spark. Something in her soul seemed to ask her to move on, even though she didn't know what the next step would be. Maria began to think more about her life, the choices she had made so far, and the opportunities that might have been hidden in front of her. She knew she couldn't go on living as she was. He decided that, when he left the hospital, he would look for a place to live, a simple house, a small corner where she could find her peace and start over. And more than that, she knew she wanted to study. He knew that to change his story, he would need something more than just a desire to change. She needed knowledge. She needed to learn how to write her own narrative. The process was not easy. Maria faced numerous difficulties. She had no money, no education that would qualify her for anything other than simple, low-paying jobs. Insecurity accompanied her whenever she thought about entering a classroom. How could someone so far from the world of education integrate? And even more, how could she be good enough to compete with so many people who had a history of studying? But somehow, she knew she had to try. And Lucas's support, though from afar, was still there, in the words and gestures he had always shown her. He believed in her, and that, for some reason, made her believe in herself. When she decided to study, Maria had to start a new process. She looked for an adult education center where she could complete her studies and, who knows, start to follow a different path. The beginning was tumultuous. Classes were challenging, and Maria often felt lost, as if the past was pulling her back with each attempt to advance. But with each mistake, with each stumble, she got up more determined. The pain, the shame, the fears, everything seemed small in the face of the desire to change. She knew that the path would be long and full of obstacles. There were nights when she wondered if she was doing the right thing, if she would really be able to move forward. But even on the most difficult nights, something kept her going. The the certainty that she no longer wanted to be a victim of circumstance. It no longer wanted to be a story of suffering that only dragged on over the years. She wanted more. She wanted to be the master of her destiny, to control the narrative of her life. And so, Maria was molding herself. She no longer saw herself as a broken person, but as someone who was under construction, someone with the ability to rewrite her own history. Each day, each achievement, no matter how small, meant a step toward the future she was beginning to draw. And as she looked back, Maria knew that the decision she had made not to return to her employer's house was undoubtedly the most important of her life. She had taken the first step towards freedom. It was difficult, of course. She still faced the remnants of the past, the fears that occasionally surfaced, trying to weaken her confidence. But she was no longer the same person as before. Something inside her had changed, something that kept her going, even when everything seemed to fall apart. She was learning to stand on her own, to trust her choices, to take control of her life. Maria, finally, was allowing herself to be the protagonist of her story. She was beginning to believe that she could be more than an orphan, more than a victim of circumstance. She was a capable woman with a future ahead of her. And as hard as the path was, she knew that every step would be worth it. But at the same time that Maria began to find herself, she still wondered what the future held. Her story was just beginning, and although she had taken important steps, she still didn't know what fate would bring her. What she did know, however, was that for the first time in a long time, she was looking at the future with the eyes of someone who believed in what she could achieve. And that, in itself, was a great start. The years passed quickly for Mary. The girl who, one day, had her face marked by flames, not only recovered from the physical burns, but also from the deep scars that life imposed. That insecure girl, marked by suffering, had transformed. She was no longer the orphan who carried the weight of rejection and fear. She had found a way, and that path now led her to a future where the only thing she had to do was believe in herself. Maria finished her studies with a twinkle in her eyes that she had never known existed before. Each page turned, each challenge faced, made her get closer to the woman she wanted to be. She felt empowered, strong, and ultimately in control of her own story. The classes, which once seemed so far from her reality, were now memories of a time when she defied all expectations. She graduated with a lot of effort, but with the certainty that the learning was not only in the books, but in everything she had overcome over the years. And when the opportunity arose, she got her first decent job, a job that made her feel that she was finally being recognized for her skills and not for her story of pain. She was respected, valued, and, for the first time, no longer ashamed of what she had been. On the contrary, she was proud of the woman she had become. The smile on Maria's face, which had once been rare, was now constant. She had found her place in the world, a place where acceptance and self-esteem were no longer distant dreams but everyday realities. Meanwhile, Clara, the woman who represented all of Maria's nightmares, was trapped in the same life of ego and vanity that she had always had. Clara didn't seem to have changed, or even understood the weight of her own mistakes. She still lived inside a bubble, as if the pain of others was something distant, irrelevant. For her, time had passed as if nothing had happened. Luxury, apparent happiness, and superiority remained the basis of their existence. However, what Clara did not know was that Maria's life had taken an entirely different turn, and that, in a way, was about to cross paths with hers again. The reunion happened almost casually. Maria, now a woman with her own identity, was at a professional event. She was confident, sure of herself, exchanging ideas and making contacts. And it was there, in the midst of that crowd, that Mary's eyes met Claire's. The shock was immediate. Clara, who had burned Maria's soul, who had made her life a living hell, seemed uncomfortable, as if the weight of what she had done was, for the first time, overflowing out of her shell of pride. The surprise on Clara's face was visible, but what Maria felt was not anger, it was not revenge. Instead, she felt a tranquility she had never known she could experience. Clara seemed fragile, perhaps even more than Maria, and this made her understand that, deep down, Clara had never known how to deal with her own pain. She had never known what it meant to be vulnerable, to be true to herself. Mary, on the other hand, had found in her vulnerability an immeasurable strength. When Claire tried to get closer, perhaps seeking some form of reconciliation, or more likely, to regain control of the situation, Maria looked at her with a serene smile. It was a smile that carried both forgiveness and understanding. Maria had not forgotten what Clara had done, but she was also no longer willing to carry the pain of the past. She no longer needed Clara's approval, nor her understanding. She was above that. The Maria of before, the one who trembled before the cruelty of life, no longer existed. The new Maria, who had overcome so much, looked at Claire with eyes that had learned to see things in a new way. The moment was brief but intense. Maria felt for a second that time had bowed before her. What she already considered a distant past still had the power to surprise. But most important of all, Maria was no longer tied to that story. She had broken free, turned her pain into strength, and now she was looking forward to what the future still held. Clara, on the other hand, seemed disoriented, almost lost in her attempt to understand what had happened. The girl she believed would never rise, who she had left behind as if she were a disposable object, now stood before her as a whole, complete, empowered woman. What she saw was a Mary who had become fire, no longer a victim of circumstance, but someone capable of turning her pain into light. Mary, in her silence, did not say a word. She didn't need to. What she had achieved was clear in every step she took, in every look, in every gesture. She was a reflection of overcoming, of the strength of a woman who had decided that no one else would control her life. What Clara didn't know was that, in that exchange of glances, Maria had already won. She was already the winner, regardless of what the past tried to offer her. Mary not only overcame the difficulties, the burns, the life of abandonment and oppression, she turned into something that no one could break anymore, because she became the owner of her own story. She became the woman that no one expected, but that now everyone would see as an example of strength and resilience. While Clara was still trying to process everything that happened, Maria continued on her way. She knew that life would not be easy, but she was no longer afraid of difficulties. She knew that what happened from then on was just another page in a story she was writing with her own hands. The reunion with Clara had been important, not because it reaffirmed her pain, but because it showed her how far she had come. She was no longer a broken girl. She was Mary, a woman transformed by pain, but also by the choice to move forward. Life, at last, was within his grasp. Maria and Lucas were together now, but the road there was not simple. There was no castle, no magical endings on a starry night. Their story was not drawn in fairy tale strokes, but in the colors of reality, with the inks of pain, scars, and daily overcoming. Together, they had built a relationship that, although simple, was deep and true. What united them were not empty words or promises made in the heat of the moment, but the mutual respect and friendship that blossomed between them, despite all the difficulties. Lucas continued to be Maria's greatest supporter. He believed in her like no one else. And, more importantly, he believed in his ability to go beyond any obstacle. He didn't just see what others saw. He saw the strength she had inside, that strength that she didn't even know existed. He saw her for what she really was, someone capable of illuminating the world with her authenticity, with her ability to transform pain into wisdom. And in the midst of all this, there was a silent complicity, built in every gesture, in every look. They didn't need many words to understand each other, because the feelings were clear. When they were together, everything seemed to make sense. It was in the simple touches, clasped hands, that the trust was reaffirmed. It was not necessary to talk about the challenges they had faced. The past was behind them, and what mattered was the construction of the future, together, side by side. That day, they were on a simple walk, one of those summer afternoons when the heat still made the breeze feel light and gentle. The streets were quiet, with the sound of trees moving gently in the wind and the noise of people laughing in the distance. Mary felt a rare comfort in her soul as she walked beside Luke. It was as if the whole world, with its problems, its uncertainties, became a lightness, all because of that moment. There was no hurry. There were no charges. Just walking together, in silence, with fingers intertwined. She looked at Lucas, And for a moment she felt something much deeper than simple gratitude. He did not see her with pious eyes, but with the eyes of those who admired the woman she had become. And she saw him just as intensely as someone who not only loved her, but who knew her deeply. They didn't need anything else. Each other's presence was enough. The world around them seemed to disappear when they were together. And on an ordinary night at his house, dinner was a reflection of everything they had achieved together. The simple dish, prepared with so much care, with the laughter of Maria and Lucas mixing with the sound of the pan in the kitchen, made any difficulty of the day be left aside. The food wasn't just food. It was a symbolism of a shared effort, of a genuine partnership. They laughed at the little moments, the little mistakes, as if each one was an opportunity to learn and grow together. And when the meal was ready, the pleasure was not in what they were eating, but in the fact that they were together, building a life where love was not a promise but a palpable reality, built on trust and pain that was now part of the way, no longer the burden. Maria felt, for the first time in a long time, complete, not because Lucas completed her, but because she had learned to see herself as someone whole. The woman who had previously seen herself fragmented, broken by circumstances and by others, now saw herself in all her fullness. She was light, and Lucas was the mirror where she saw herself. He did not heal her, nor did he try to take her out of a place of pain. But with his presence, she found the way to healing in herself. The love that had arisen between them was not a romantic fantasy, but a solid construction made of simple and meaningful moments. Mary and Luke did not need grand gestures to affirm what was already clear. They had already been through the storms, and now they were there together as if the world around them were just a backdrop of something much bigger, something that was theirs, something that no one else could take away. The two looked at each other, feeling the comfort of mutual company. It was not the beginning of an idealized story, but the result of a real and transformative journey. It was more than love. It was an unbreakable partnership. They had discovered, together, that true love is not made of grandiose moments or empty promises, but of small daily actions, of gestures of care, of support, of understanding. When you were next to someone who truly believed in you, the impossible became possible. And as day turned to night and the sound of the city faded in the distance, Maria and Lucas continued to walk, not just through the streets, but through life, side by side, with their hands clasped together, knowing that no matter what the future held, they had overcome what seemed insurmountable, and now they were just two hearts that, when they met, became whole. The pain that had once marked them had become the fuel that fed the strength of their love, and that was more than enough to face whatever came. They were prepared. They were invincible together. If you've made it this far, it's because something in this story has touched you. And I just want to tell you one thing. Your story isn't defined by the obstacles you face, but by how you choose to overcome them. Just like Maria, you can also turn around, rebuild yourself, and find the strength you didn't even know you had. It doesn't matter what happened before. What matters is what you choose to do now. If this message made sense to you, share your thoughts in the comments. Write something like, "This message was for me because I'd love to know that we're on this journey together." And if you felt that this content had something important for your life, don't forget to leave that like. It's a way to show that the connection was true and to help us spread that good energy. Oh, and there's a video here on the side that will continue this reflection in a very powerful way. Click there and come with me, because the story doesn't stop here. Let's move forward together.